Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's session on getting ready for your CMMC certification. Sydney, what are we talking about today?
All right. Well, today we're going to be covering the full CMMC landscape, what's going on, and the common pitfalls that might delay or set you back from obtaining your CMMC Level 2 certification. We'll also be walking you through what a gap assessment looks like, how to structure that practically, and build out that roadmap to get you fully through your remediation. And then moving forward as you near assessment, how you are to build a sustainable, repeatable, compliance strategy that will go forward through the next 3 years, as you will have to certify again and again if you are successful. And then we'll also touch on some of those AU controls, which I know Blumira as a SIM control will be going deep diving into the importance of that. And then we'll conclude with a Q&A. So of course, if you have any questions about any aspect of this, what's happening in the CMMC world, or your technical questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. So we'll start off with a quick intro. My name is Sydney Wright. I am a PMP certified project manager at Alluvionic. I work primarily with our cybersecurity compliance team here. So we are a registered practitioner organization. We work on that readiness side for CMMC. So we do everything from those basic gap assessments to full remediations, documenting policies, procedures, SSP, validating your artifacts and getting you organized. And we have walked a few of our customers through their full assessment, and we are CMMC Level 2 certified ourselves. So both my colleague Bobby and I have seen that firsthand. So I'll turn it over to Bobby to introduce himself.
Yes, thank you, Sydney. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Bobby Padilla here. I serve as the Information Security Director at Alluvionic, or closely with Sydney. I'm also a CMMC certified professional, and I oversee our own organization's CMMC compliance program. And then, most importantly, I lead our CMMC compliance services team, where we help support defense contractors navigate their path to CMMC certification. Looking forward to today's discussion and sharing any insights. Thank you.
And we're also joined by Chris Furner, the head of partner enablement at Blumira. Chris?
Hi, Sydney. Hi, everyone. Chris Furner. I work mainly on our partner team at Blumira, but more broadly, I also work with any of our customers that have compliance needs. So I have a very technical background, so I help a lot with helping customers understand how we can satisfy various compliance requirements. Obviously, CMC is a big thing right now, so I do spend a lot of time helping our CMC customers. We've worked with Alluvionic in the past with some different CMC projects, and excited to talk to everybody today about this.
All right, next slide, please. So looking at the current CMMC landscape, so we are in the year 2026, which means we are rolling out the enforcement of CMMC. So by this November, the DoD, or Department of War, as it is now called, can start putting this in your contracts. So that's the big goal that I know a lot of you are working towards. And then you're wondering what's happening in 2028, that is when the CMMC program reaches full maturity. So at that point, most DoD contracts are going to include this CMMC certification requirement. So if you want to continue doing business with the DoD, you'll want to have your certification by then. And it will become a sustainment model. So every 3 years after you are certified, you will have to get recertified by a third-party assessor. So the key takeaway that you'll see throughout this is that you want to start now, as it is quite an extensive process to get yourself ready. So with that, we'll go right into our conversation. So Chris, looking at this timeline, I know you assembled this overview. Do you want to speak a little bit about this rollout?
Yeah, so I think that there's one of the big things, I guess going back a step, one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar today is because people are kind of confused about, are unsure about, what the plan looks like. They see a bunch of different dates out there. They see this 2028 date, and so, oh, great, I've got 3 years to get something here, or 2 years, or whatever. So think that, kind of breaking down a little bit what this actually, means over time, can kind of help people understand, what their action items are now. Like you said, if you want new business in the future, what you got to do to keep that business. So, Last year we kind of hit the November 2025 mark where CMC kind of became a real thing in force. Where we kind of started out with was a way for a lot of organizations to, um, get started without having to do the entire thing all at once, all up front. The DoD knows that they need to keep this business rolling. They can't just drop all the requirements all on day one or year one. So what we saw last year is that, you could, if you had a level one requirement for a new contract, you could of course do a level one self-assessment, which is what level ones are. But the kind of the big thing was that level two requirements could be satisfied. I think we call it temporarily, by doing a self-assessment. But as we kind of look forward into November of 2026 now, what we're going to see is that the potential of new contracts in November of 2026 calling for a level two requirement and calling for an assessed level two requirement. So, you by the end of this year, you're going to see cases where you can no longer get that business unless you, do have that assessment done. And kind of as we'll talk about in a minute here, um, you got to start now or yesterday or last month to kind of hit that mark. And not everybody's got to hit that mark right in November. Depends on when you want to bid for contracts. But, it does take time. And as we look forward into, November 2027, there's a lot of uncertainty about CMC level 3. That's a much more narrow scope in terms of who's going to be impacted by that. But, into 2028, we're going to see the entirety of CMC, implemented. But I think that probably the big thing that we're seeing now is that November of 2026 deadline where people are going to have to then, not just be able to get by with a self-assessment, have an assessment for the C3PAO, get on somebody's schedule, get everything in order, work with a consultant maybe to make sure that you have everything kind of, figured out and you have confidence that you're going to pass. And yeah, that November 2026 date seems like it's a long ways away, but it's going to come up fast once you start working on getting everything figured out, right?
Yeah. And we got, I'm very excited. Usually we get these later into the session, but we got our first question that came in asking today we are going to be mostly focusing on the phase 2 level 2 discussion, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that's kind of, I think that the vast majority of people that are going to need to have an assessment are going to be level 2 as well. So yeah.
Absolutely. Excellent. All right. I lost my window here. I apologize.
Can
everyone.
can I always
yeah.
do something real quick before we move forward? So yeah, as Chris illustrated, so right now we're in that phase 1 period, right? So that November of 2025, the the CMMC clause, which is the DFARS 7021, that can now be, entered in contracts by the government contracting officers. So we're basically in that period of time now, right? So organizations, if you are currently a defense contractor, you should already be making progress to implement the entire framework, whether it's a level one or level 2 requirement. So by November of 2026, the self-attestation, that's going to come due. And so someone in your organization, the affirmation official will go into the supplier performance risk system and affirm to your compliance. So it's kind of a soft period there that the ecosystem at this point doesn't have enough assessors for this first year. So they're allowing self-attestation only for the first year. But again, you must still comply with all the requirements by November of 2026. And then moving into phase 2, that's when you would require no question a certified third party assessment. If you have a CMMC level 2 requirement. However, I will caveat, we're starting to see a lot of clients that are coming to us for support because their prime contractor is really just moving up that date. So they're not allowing the self-attestation, for example. So they want to make sure that they are certified third party before November of 2025. So they're actually holding some of their suppliers to a higher standard. And they're doing that because they're mitigating their risk, right? So they understand that the DoD Department of War has kind of put in this self-attestation period. But if they're if this prime contractor is bidding for a contract this year, they may not wait for you to self-attest and then third-party certified into next year. So that's just something, this conversation that you may want to have with your prime contractor about those requirements because we are starting to see a higher standard placed on the suppliers.
The great point. I think I just saw on LinkedIn this morning, somebody posted a screenshot of some message they got from their prime. And it basically said that, like, hey, we're not going to wait. There's a lot of options out there. We need to pitch the options now that are going to be compliant. And anyway, I don't know if you guys have any, Bobby or Sydney, have any like estimate on this, but there's a lot of primes, but there's a lot of subs. And so there's going to be a lot of these small businesses that are going to start to get that pressure put on them.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes, we're seeing a lot of that right now. We're getting a lot of the subs, and they don't necessarily have an internal IT team or an MSP, and they've been forced with these requirements. We've even seen some small electricians that work with these larger primes, and then they're forced into complying with these. So, in some ways, it seems like it's an unfair requirement from the government when such a small company with limited resources is required to go through such an intensive and expensive process. But there's certainly ways to do it, but you definitely want to be looking now. So I think with that, we can move forward, Zoe. Right. So moving into the common pitfalls that might delay you or throw you off from getting your certification. So I think the biggest thing is your scoping. So every assessment remediation that we do, we always start with scoping because that determines the entire premise of how the assessors are going to conduct their audit of your environment. So Bobby, I don't know if you want to chime in on best practices for scoping.
Yeah, I think, ideally, your assessment doesn't necessarily have to uh, involve the entire organization. Some organizations are very small, so there may be organizations where every person, every system is going to be handling CUI, so therefore it would kind of be the CUI boundary or scope is going to be the entire company. But we're seeing a lot of companies that are larger, but maybe only a small percentage of the business is doing work for the DoD or for defense contract work. So they're able to kind of silo or enclave out a portion of the network and the IT environment, and then only apply the security requirements to that portion. So really, it's really just starting with CUI data flow that we referred to it. It's really just kind of identifying all the paths and all the places that the controlled unclassified information is flowing within your organization, right? Are you doing it in email, or are you storing it in the cloud on local servers on in your facility? Are you printing it? So just kind of lots of different paths to the flow of CUI. That's going to help determine the scope, and then that's your boundary, and then that's where you can start applying the compliance and the security requirements against that scope. Again, not necessarily against the entire company.
And what would you define as a poorly scoped environment and what you're seeing with our customers?
Poorly scoped. I mean, I would say, you know, just from a non-compliance perspective, we are seeing commonly we're seeing CUI that is being stored in the Microsoft Commercial Cloud. So just about every small business operates in the Microsoft Commercial Cloud. It's very efficient. So everyone kind of uses, email and SharePoint and OneDrive. But on the Microsoft Commercial Cloud, the storage of CUI is not authorized. So that's something that we've commonly seen. So it's kind of, I would say it's poorly scoped. It's not necessarily the fault. They didn't understand the requirements. So we work, with clients towards um, moving the data to an authorized cloud service provider, if you will. So lots of different ways to approach that. The Microsoft Government Community Cloud, often referred to as GCC or GCC High, is an option, but it's not the only option. There are other cloud service providers that meet the FedRAMP requirement for the storage of CUI. So we could always talk about that as well. But that's one example of what we see as far as poor scoping, if you will.
Absolutely. And we've seen a lot of manufacturing companies come through. I bet some of you here today work for some sort of large production facility where you have legacy machinery and items that be touching physical CUI and those kind of things, but they aren't capable of operating in a modern IT infrastructure. So, Bobby, do you want to speak a little bit more on how to handle specialized assets and kind of the workarounds for those types of companies?
Yeah. So, um, yeah, definitely manufacturers are going to have, CNC machines or operational technology, OT equipment, things like that. So there is in the CMMC um, assessment process, there are various categories. So one of the ways to address those types of equipment is through a category referred to as a specialized asset. So this is where you would um, identify those equipment that perhaps may not be able to meet the security requirements. So, for example, if something required multi-factor authentication or encryption, but the legacy piece of equipment is so old it's not really realistic or possible, technically possible. So there are some categories that can be classified that will provide some leniency on certification. One of them is called an enduring exception, where it simply states that the remediation or or the compliance is not technically feasible, not realistic. So that's just based on the system's design and nature, or possibly even mission need. So you could classify that as an enduring exception, but everything would need to be documented, right? So you can't wait till your assessment is being performed, and when they ask about a certain piece of equipment that is handling CUI, you can't just say, well, it's just it's outdated. You would have to get ahead of it, right? You'd have to identify all those assets ahead of time. You'd have to classify them under that category. Then you would document all that in your system security plan. So the assessment team would already kind of know in advance as they've reviewed your system security plan well before they come on site, that you have already categorized and designated certain equipment as not being able to meet the compliance. Um, so that's how you would address those types of equipment.
Absolutely. And if you're here today and by chance haven't really started your process of getting everything ready for this, but you know you need to get going, a good place to start would be generating an asset inventory of all of your items and using that asset tagging, as Bobby mentioned, categorizing what CUI and also documenting how CUI moves throughout your systems. Get a list of all of those users who handle CUI. Is everyone in the company? So then you're going to have that enclave approach or enterprise approach, my bad. And only if it's only a few select portion, then that narrows your scope down, which does make it easier because that's a smaller portion of your environment that will be assessed. So assessors do like to say the smaller your scope, the quicker your assessment will go. But we know that's not always feasible. So if you can document those two things, that's usually the best way to start because that will dictate how the rest of your policies and SSP go. Um,
I'll just add to that. You mentioned asset inventory. Like every business should have an asset inventory. If you have compliance requirements or not. We see this so often where people say, well, where do I start on security? It's like, well, do you even know what you have? Maybe a little bit. We've got a spreadsheet that's not updated in 6 months. So that nobody can go wrong by focusing on an asset inventory, no matter what your security requirements are.
Absolutely.
And before we move on, we got another question asking, do you recommend GCC or GCC High for CUI file storage?
Great question. Bobby Padilla, do you want to take that one?
So I would sure, right. But I'll caveat by saying that there are many options to meet compliance. And I would certainly consider all options based on your organization's scope. IT budget is going to be a big one. One of the benefits of the Microsoft Government Community Cloud, the GCC environment, is that with your licensing, um, comes a lot of the native Microsoft security tools. So a lot of the software and security requirements that are going to be required to meet a lot of the security requirements for CMMC level 2, they're going to be natively integrated into the Microsoft security stack and your licensing. However, it could come at a premium. So it's going to be based on your organization's, needs, environment. We see clients that they just like Microsoft. They're used to those tools, so they would prefer to do that. But we have other clients that they leverage other federal cloud service providers, and then they also just rely on an external IT service provider that can provide the same level of security to meet all the requirements as well. So yeah, I know it's kind of a long way to say it will certainly meet the requirements, but there are other ways to do it as well.
And then we had oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just one note on that. I think one warning to mention is we have seen some people, they think they have the FedRAMP solution. They must be good to go. So just having that and having your CUI live in that does not mean that all of your documentation and other technical implementations are up to compliance. So yes, that is an excellent step towards, controlling the CUI and access, but it's not everything.
Yeah, I would say that I think my biggest advice there would be if you are storing CUI in the cloud or have intentions to, that your cloud service provider must meet the FedRAMP, requirements, FedRAMP authorized or FedRAMP moderate equivalent. So again, there are, at least a handful of other cloud service provider alternatives than the Microsoft GCC.
And we had also gotten a question about some differentiation or discussion around CUI and ITAR data. They said, as this also greatly increases the requirements necessary to meet.
Yeah, so the ITAR, the International Trafficking in Arms, a form of CUI held to a higher standard. The main things there are the U.S. personnel, not your personnel. This is the data center, so the cloud storage data center that's located somewhere in the United States, right? We don't even know where it is. We don't care. We just want the information to be accessible to us. There are certain, again, FedRAMP requirements that data center has been assessed to and accredited. So the requirements for ITAR is that, again, just for example, the Microsoft data centers, they would only have U.S. Persons that would work on the data centers, work on that equipment, et cetera. So that's a requirement, right? Because in essence, they would kind of have access to the ITAR. So again, that's a kind of the ITAR requirements. So therefore, you would need to make sure you have a FedRAMP cloud service provider that meets those ITAR requirements as well.
Okay, thanks.
Whereas, for example, I talked a little bit earlier about the Microsoft commercial cloud earlier. The Microsoft commercial cloud information can be stored in worldwide data centers. So therefore, certainly that would not meet ITAR requirements based on what I said about the U.S. Citizens only.
Absolutely. I think going into this, obviously, you want to start with a gap assessment. So a lot of that is getting everything in order, understanding where you're at. So as mentioned before, scoping is going to be the first place that you start. Document all of your assets, all of your users, the flow of CUI. If you don't have CUI yet, but you might acquire it in the future, how would you process that? Sometimes that's an easier place to start. We've had a few people who don't have any yet, but they believe they will eventually, so they're preparing in advance for that. And then conducting a full gap assessment. So you can self-assess. I know there's a lot of tools out there where you can go through control by control and document whether or not you've met that control and provide evidence to support that. So if you are sort of doing this alone, that is a good place to look into. However, it is a huge undertaking because not only are there 110 controls, but you have another 320 objectives to comply to. And if you're not super familiar about the language, you might want to look into engaging with an RPO or another consultant. So that is mostly why people come to us, just because of the understanding or even the manpower, because it is a lengthy process to go through all 14 domains and all of their subcontrols. So um, highly recommend just a quick assessment of where your gaps are, and that would be the basis of your POAMs, obviously. So that's sort of a roadmap for how you're going to remediate and prioritizing those longer term items first is sometimes recommended. Some people like to do some quick wins. So if you're not aware, the controls are based on a 1, 3, or 5-point scale, and that's how they get to that 110 score. So obviously, the scale maybe doesn't make sense. It goes from -203 to 110. Why the government decided that, I don't know. We've had people that the government does weird things, but that is the scale, and so your goal obviously is a 110. But those 5-pointers, sometimes those are things that touch multiple control areas, so you definitely want to highlight those, and those are bigger risks. But sometimes a 1-pointer, it might just be a simple documentation adage or something like that. So some people like to knock those out first to see their score go up. On that note, though, I know Bobby works with a lot of GAF assessments. So what sort of advice do you have for someone starting this process?
Yeah, we kind of talked about earlier is just defining the scope, right? So kind of again, identifying where that CUI is flowing. That's going to be helpful because again, then you only have to assess or comply with those assets, right? Those systems, those people, those facilities. So certainly start there, and then again, just understanding the security requirements, right? So the 110 security requirements that must be met for CMMC level 2 compliance. But as Sydney indicated, there's 320 subcontrols are referred to as assessment objectives in the NIST 800-171 revision 2 framework. So when you are assessed by a third-party assessor, all the subcontrols or assessment objectives must be met to meet the compliance for that control. So even a single objective, even if a single objective is not met, you would not meet the compliance for that control. So understanding the objectives, the interpretation of what's required for them, that's really critical. So, if that's something that you undertake yourself and you don't have questions, if you have questions and you're not sure, you certainly want to work with a compliance partner, right? So, who has experience, understands what the third-party assessment organizations are going to be assessing. For example, some of those subcontrols are met through documentation. So you have to identify something or define something. So it's really you're writing a compliance statement on how you define or identify something. And then other objectives are how you enforce something or how you implement something. Those are going to be more your artifacts and evidence of maybe your configurations of your settings on a system. So there's lots of documentation. Every objective is assessed differently. Whether as I said, some things are met through documentation and other things are met through artifact evidence, or even like a screen share example. And that's exactly the process that the third party assessor is going to take during your assessment. So if you're not clear on that, it might be a good idea to seek assistance.
And I think we got a great question here. I expect that several folks will probably be wondering this. They wanted to know, what's a better way of understanding what exactly is considered CUI within your environment? I've gotten mixed responses on what is classified as CUI.
So ultimately, your contracting officer is responsible for that. If you're not sure, you really should reach out to your prime or the contracting officer for that, because you yourself are not authorized to label that as CUI or designate it as CUI. And if it has been marked by the government as CUI, then that is your responsibility to label and protect it. But we have absolutely heard of the government flowing down documents and that seem like CY, it's not labeled as CY, and then the contractor goes back and asks them, hey, is this CUI? And the government says, I don't know. So unfortunately, that is more common than it should be. We're hoping that that becomes less so. I'll turn it over to Bobby for more of that technical identification. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from a compliance perspective, right? We're not the experts of your business. You could show me a document, and if it's not marked clearly, right, as controlled unclassified information, then it's speculation at that point, right? If you show me with this drawing, it looks sensitive. I'm like, yeah, but that's we really need to talk to your customer, right, or the prime or the government, because they're the classifying authority, right, for that. Um, it certainly happens, right? Mismarking, overclassification, underclassifying. I've had customers where they've been handling sensitive information or CUI for 20 years. They've had employees there that have worked there for 20 years. They know exactly what the information that's flowed down to them, when it's CUI and when it's not, just because of their experience in that company. Um, and they could tell me that, yeah, this should have been marked, right? I've seen this before where it was marked on another project, for example. So um, from our perspective, right, we're the compliance experts. We're not the CUI experts. But I think the rule of thumb for me and my advice is, if you feel it's sensitive, right, you certainly should try to collaborate with your customer or the government. But if in doubt, you should safeguard it, because again, the whole point of this is to protect our nation's sensitive information. So therefore, if you felt it was sensitive, you should protect it accordingly, at least until you get the further clarification.
Bobby, I've got maybe a comment or question about a misconception there, that some people think maybe that they need to segregate their CUI, and that they maybe need to have a compliance environment that's dedicated only to CUI. Is that true, or can they, for instance, say, fine, we'll just certify our entire environment and just keep all the data in there, CUI and non-CUI?
Yeah, that's totally fine. Again, it's all about scope and defining. So one of the benefits of this program is you get to determine your scope, right? So as I kind of indicated earlier, if you're a small company of 3 people, 5 people, um, everyone does both commercial work and government work, right? There's really no difference. So perhaps it's just easier to just certify everyone, all the people, all the systems, and then you can do both. You can operate both parts of the business under one refer to it as an enterprise. It's not much of an enterprise if it's that small, but that's the kind of the terminology that it's kind of an all-in approach. Whereas again, you see other clients, they'll just carve out a portion. There's maybe a 50 or 60 person company, but only 5 or 10 people are going to be using handling CUI ever. So they'll carve out a separate enclave, and the key with the CUI is having either physical or logical separation. So you could still do both of the parts of the business. If you're a CUI user, you just have to be segregated away from the rest of the, again, physically or logically separated uh, away from the rest of the company, like assets.
Okay. Makes sense. Thank you.
Absolutely. Was there any follow-up on that in the chat or related questions?
Think we've got the ones that have come in so far. I'm sure we'll get more as we go.
Yeah, Sydney, before we move on, I know I kind of just elaborated there, but just back to the gap assessment, I talked about, I went on and on about the assessment objectives, but then of course for our process, we're going to assess your compliance against, again, the entire framework, all the objectives. And then we're going to produce, a roadmap, right? So we're gonna certainly document all of the compliance that you do have. We'll generate those compliance statements and those implementation details to document everything that you have met, and put that into a system security plan. But then more importantly, we're also going to document your gaps and deficiencies, right? So there are going to be probably some things that are not fully met. We'll provide recommendations for that. whether it's, vendors or processes or procedures or policies that need to be generated. We'll provide recommendations there. So again, at the end of the engagement, you're going to have a system security plan. You're going to have a plan of action and milestones and a roadmap for all the deficiencies that you have. So that's really important as then as you transition into your kind of remediation phase of your compliance.
Absolutely. And I think another question we've seen, so say you get to the end of your gap assessment, you've done your score, and maybe you're at an 88, which I think some of you have heard, oh, I can pass my assessment with an 88 SDRS score. That is sort of a myth a little bit. So yes, there is a way to do it with your operational poems, and you have to make those fixes within a certain timeline afterwards, but that does not apply to any and every control in the process. So simply just getting yourself 80% there is not good enough. So rule of thumb, you really should be at that 110 when you go into assessment, unless there really is one of those controls that is going to take longer, and you're absolutely sure that you have that fully documented and will have it done within the timeline afterwards. So
Would you say that it's probably advisable to not go into an assessment at all unless you're positive that you're going to pass everything? Like, don't go in saying we're going to try and get an 88 or a 90 or a 95 and then we'll fix it.
absolutely. Yeah, the assessments are expensive. So if you fail it, guess what? They're going to make you pay for it again. So as you budget for this, I think any CFO or finance person at your company is not going to want to budget for more than one assessment. So you better have all of your evidence ready to go. Your documentation better reflect what you're doing. So obviously, you can make some minor updates on the fly to documentation. I think we've seen where an SSP said there was like a minimum length of something, and then, or it was a time length, and then a policy said a slightly different thing. And so obviously the practice aligned with, I think, the policy. So then the SSP just had to be updated to match. And that kind of change is acceptable, and they can process that the same day and during your assessment. But other things where it's clear that the whole organization is out of compliance from what is written down is not going to be easy to fix. So I think the word of advice, if you have processes already and people doing one thing, is it's always easier to update documentation versus your people. So better to align the documentation to what you're doing, as long as that's within the compliance standards.
And of course, if you fail or a 3 or 5 point control, then you're sunk. No matter if your score is 105, you're still sunk.
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah, I think the poems generally only going to allow for the 1 point controls. There's one exception for encryption but you had to still have it implemented if it just was maybe not FIPS FIPS mode enabled. That's something that you could go back and poem. But yeah, it's kind of fool's gold, honestly. Like, it's not really a great path forward to compliance. There's little wiggle room for error at all. So certainly you would want to feel very confident that you're at 110 right before you go for third party certification.
Yeah, makes sense. I think from my standpoint, we see a lot of businesses that are, maybe because of so many things, like the uncertainty of how this process works, how to get started, the fear of possibly failing an assessment, they're just kind of like really paralyzed in terms of like how to get started. I think the gap assessment probably makes a lot of sense in terms of starting to like look at what you're missing, what you have, start to identify the scope of understanding your problem and getting in a state where you can move forward and get things done. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'll just close on this one. So we do offer like a couple different kind of assessments. So I described kind of the lengthy, where we're assessing every objective, every control, every objective, which is going to be required, right, for certification. But some of our clients, they're literally starting with nothing, right? They're just being told they have to comply with CMMC. They had never heard of it before, last week when their prime contractors asking about their status. So we have a lighter assessment approach where we start with sometimes it's just interview based only. You just tell us what you have. We're not validating it yet, but it just gives us an indication. It's a much quicker way for us to give you a score and give you a roadmap, right? So there's no point in spending time on 6 or 7 objectives if you have none of it implemented, right? So we can just kind of holistically assess the control. And in some cases, you won't have the compliance, but we will then provide a roadmap for you to get to the compliance to include all the objectives, right? So it's a lower cost approach. It's much quicker. It gives you basically a compliance score on kind of where you are, and then again provides a roadmap. So it's just a different, less costly way to do it as well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, audit and accountability, that is one of the 14 domains, and that requires evidence of audit logging, usually through the implementation of a SIM, which Blumira offers. So I'll let Chris speak more to this.
Yeah, thanks, Sydney. So yeah, we've been helping businesses, MSPs, and MSPs that support the businesses with the audit and accountability requirements for a while now. And we kind of picked out a few of the 9 controls here in AU, mainly ones that are 3 and 5 point controls, because again, like there's no second chances on those. So one of the tenets of CMC is, of course, good security for the CUI, but a big part of it is auditing access to the CUI, auditing access of the files, the people that have access to the environment, what people have done in the environment. If it's an incident, being able to go look back in time and see what happened before the incident. So that's really what a SIM supports from the standpoint of what CMMC really wants is, that audit trail. So, that's where a SIM like Blumira comes into play. Ingesting logs from all the things, as many things as possible, making those logs. And this is a big part of, there's a big emphasis in AU on logs that can't be modified or deleted. So putting logs in a third, an offsite or a separate location that can't be modified or deleted, making those logs readily accessible for review. Those are of course things that an assessor might either ask you for an explanation on, or could potentially say, like, all right, let's do an audit log search real quick and let's see if what you say the capabilities you have are actually there. So we've been pretty happy so far with the outcomes of the assessments that our customers have gone through. I've heard nothing but, we passed, no notes, no issues. So it's been pretty smooth sailing so far, but we're certainly not just saying that you can just, grab Blumira and go with it. We do have some materials and support on our side to help, and that's something that you should look for with any tool that you're bringing into your CMMC environment, is a vendor who has the experience and the tools to help you make sure that you're fitting the need, supporting the controls, providing evidence, providing assistance, that kind of stuff. So, on this list, again, like defining what audit logs, some of this is again paperwork, defining what kind of, audit logs you're going to keep, hopefully a lot or everything, as many things as possible. All the audit logs you define that you need, those have to go to the SIM. Again, those audit logs need to support your CUI handling, who accesses the environment, who accesses the files, having access to search the logs, and then, 3.3.8, make sure the logs can't be deleted or modified. So, again, we're happy with how things have gone so far. There's several good SIMs that are out there, and I think that we're happy so far that we're among the ones that make sense in these environments.
And we had gotten another question asking if firewalls that they are using need to run FIPS certified firmware.
So short answer, yes. Again, if your firewall is in scope, right? So which it most likely will be if you're processing, storing, transmitting CUI inside your facility. So your firewall would need to meet the FIPS 140-2 or 3. 2 is the minimum standard validated requirements. So FIPS validated encryption plus also enabled in FIPS mode as well.
And so that's basically probably at a higher level, any place that you store, process, or transmit CUI, you have to use encryption. It has to be FIPS encryption, right?
Yeah.
So we also of course see FIPS, what on where where you're storing the files on site. GCC High of course has FIPS validated encryption, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so like workstations, right? Endpoints, Windows 11 workstations, there's a requirement for encryption at rest that would be normally taken care of on a Windows environment through Microsoft BitLocker. But
Absolutely.
then the additional requirement would be that there's a registry key to enable it in FIPS node as well.
Awesome. Well, as we are sort of nearing the end of this, we definitely want you to kind of walk away with a sense of how to forecast this. So, as a project manager, I've seen a variety of customers with different levels of maturity go through this. And of course, we ourselves have gotten quicker at working through those remediations too over the years. So, Alluvionic began their journey towards readiness way back in 2020 when they first knew that this was going to be a thing. And I know some other customers also began early too and got through the finish line. But some of you are just starting today, whether you're newer to the contracting world or just now understanding that this is a requirement. So it's already kind of, if you're trying to meet that November goal, then you probably should have been preparing a few months ago, certainly, but that doesn't mean you're at a loss. So your first step obviously is to organize kind of all of what you have and start a gap analysis. So understanding where your gaps are, go through that assessment, and then create your poems, which is one of the items that you will hand over to assessors anyway, showing that you have worked through and kept those items. So poems will serve as a roadmap for how you'll remediate. So you'll have that scoring system. You'll know what those 5 pointers are that you absolutely have to hit. And of course, all of the other controls that you should be aiming to hit anyway. And then in that kind of 6 to 10 months phase, so where we're at, you should be working through actually resolving all of those poem items. So the way that we often approach our remediations is we go domain by domain and we will update your SPRS score every month so you can track that progress, and we'll explain kind of what controls help meet that based on the gaps. So after a baseline assessment, you kind of know where all of your gaps are, that's documented. And then as we go through the process, those get resolved through documentation and technical implementations in place. And then once you're kind of through that process, you're close to that 110 or you're at 110, you do need some time to get yourself organized. So I wouldn't go in on your assessment the day after you've gotten that 110 score, because you might still have documentation and artifacts all over the place, or maybe not even saved. So the best recommendation is having things that you can pull up quickly. You don't want to be searching through all of your files or figuring out where to pull up the system to show an assessor on the spot, because that makes your assessment longer and that's also going to stress you out more. You're already going to be anxious in this process. So we recommend just you have your folders in place for each domain. You have your policies and procedures all together for each domain, and then your artifacts folders. Try and label them by control. So I know the assessors that we've seen, they definitely go control by control. I've seen them even send out their invites for that day, and it will list out the controls they're going to assess. So you'll have that ahead of time. You can have all of your artifacts and your policies for those domains and controls already pulled up and ready to go when they get to those sorts of questions. So that'll help relieve some stress for you and also make sure that you have everything in place and that you're actually ready to go. The other piece of wisdom we've seen is make sure you document your SSP to the sub control level. I've seen some misinformation or some confusion where people think that just to the high level is good enough, but you're actually missing many of the details that actually support how you've implemented all of these controls. So if your SSP is only 10 pages long, you're probably missing those critical information. It really is like a 100-page document that has everything in it. That's essentially the roadmap for the assessor and for your organization. And that's going to be a living, breathing document for your organization as you sustain assessment as well. So leading up to that assessment phase, by that point, you should have selected a C3 PAO. One other thing is that they book often 6 months out. Some have sooner availability, but if you're having that goal, if you want to get certified in November and you're working towards that, I would definitely start talking to them today or within the next month. So schedule some introductions. I would meet with multiple of them because you're going to be working with them. You want to like these people. They have the criteria they all have to meet. So obviously you can't bribe them or persuade them in any way. There's none of that going on, but you do want there to be a good fit and comfortable with how they assess their environment. Are you okay with them using a 1099 CCA to do your assessment, or do you want them fully integrated with their company? Those are all things to consider. Is how big is their organization? What's their experience with your type of organization? Are you a manufacturing environment with a lot of specialized assets? Do they know about those kind of things and understand the challenges you're working with and be able to kind of understand where you're coming from in your documentation to help meet those goals? So definitely want a fit there. And then you will be asked to upload your SSP and several other pieces of artifacts to the EMAS system prior, and they will go through it. And usually that's when you get a green light to move forward. Doesn't mean they're going to already evaluate everything. So there's obviously always still a chance you could fail going into it, but sometimes if they immediately see your SSP is not documented all the way, or you don't have your CY like scoped clearly, then they might send you back. So definitely want to be prepared by that point, or you're starting all over again. All right. So moving outwards, we definitely want to leave you guys with that sustainable strategy, because again, this is not a one and done thing. I think a lot of people think, okay, this is IT's responsibility. We'll get through this one assessment, check all the boxes, and then we're done. But truth is, this is you safeguarding the government's information. So that is an ongoing responsibility that you have working in the defense industrial base. So once that full maturity is in place, if you want to win those contracts for your business, you definitely want to keep all of your systems and operations up to date. Everyone has a part in this in your company. So even HR and how they're documenting people offboarding, making sure access is removed, all of those things are part of the strategy. So everyone sort of has ownership in this. You should know that when the assessor does come, they often do come on site, and they could ask anyone in your company, how does this work? Can you prove that your badge doesn't swipe into the room with all the CUI if you're not a CUI user? So definitely something you don't want to just go back to old habits after you have reached this level of compliance. So ownership is key. Having your leadership's buy-in helps with this. So we see a lot of people struggle where they're kind of leading this effort, but maybe their CEO doesn't care. So there's really no enforcement for the rest of the organization to be following these new processes, because things change, right? You have to put MFA on your system. That's annoying. So people are going to push back. Why would they want 2 extra steps to get into their work when it used to be so much easier? But so there's a lot of things that you have to consider when implementing this. So keep in mind that you're going for a long-term 3-year annual reaffirmment of your certification. And any changes, so if you go into like a joint venture or things like that, that totally changes your scope in SSP, you might have to get recertified, unfortunately.
I think it's kind of just going back to the changes thing. I think that's probably a thing that maybe some people don't realize, is that there's a significant cost to making big changes in the middle of your term, that you might trigger a reassessment, which nobody wants to do that in the middle of the term.
Absolutely. You're merging your companies now. Definitely wait and understand how those two systems are going to play out. If you're all falling under one SSP and IT infrastructure, how that's going to work. But likely you still will operate sort of separately, which means each company might need their own assessment. So it's good to do that and ask assessors up front if you know you're going through that before you even start the process. Any other words of advice, Bobby? I know you're working through a lot of customers too, going through this. So.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it on a lot of that. Leadership buy-in. This is obviously huge for the company, the business. We've seen kind of delegation of the compliance program to just the IT department or the IT staff. This is going to extend well beyond IT. There is a lot of IT, right? Certainly. So your IT team will be interviewed and they'll have to show evidence. But there's an HR role, there's a marketing role, and then more importantly, there's just the operational users role, right? That if you're a manufacturer, the people that work on your production floor, those are the people that are handling CUI, right? Those people will be interviewed by the assessment team to make sure that everything that the IT person wrote, right, for all the policies and procedures on how we handle CUI, to make sure that it's being properly implemented and trained by the actual handlers of the information, right? So this is this is an entire kind of organization certification. So there are various stakeholders. So I can't stress that enough, that it's not just one or two people that's going to take you through this. It certainly is going to include you know, the operations of your company. So when you define that scope, right? Um, when I ask how does CUI flow, I almost don't want to hear from the IT person. I want to hear from the operations manager, because they're the ones who really know, do we print it? Do we put it on USB devices? What systems does it go to? Um, so that's really critical.
For sure. I know we're running out of time, so we want to just leave you. If you're feeling still lost about this, we would be happy to consult you if you're looking for somebody to do that gap assessment or be more involved and help you actually remediate these things. And you can feel fully confident, or even have one of us join you through your assessment after that. Definitely reach out to that email or phone number below, and our team is very responsive to that.
And we also would welcome you. We have a landing page on Blumira's site with more information about how Blumira helps to meet those audit and accountability controls. We also do have Chris here on our team, who's helped us put together a useful checklist. So if you check that page, there's the ability to reach out there for one of our team to contact you. We can set up some time to chat. We can show you a demo, and we can provide you with that checklist to help you get in front of that portion, that domain of those controls for you. As a reminder, we will be sending out a email follow-up tomorrow with a on-demand version of today's recording. Once again, if you have additional questions for Alluvionic, you can reach out to them at info@alluvionic.com. You can reach out to us through the linked page here, which is just our domain at blumira.com/CMMC. With that, I want to thank our presenters for all of this fantastic information. I want to thank our attendees for joining, taking some time out of your day to get in front of what can be a pretty intimidating process. And we hope to see you on another webinar very soon. Oh, and if you have a moment, there is going to be a survey that pops up right at the end. Please share your feedback. We're always looking to improve the program and to build topics that help answer the questions that you have. So if there's something else that you would have liked to see in a future session, let us know and we'll be happy to address. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll be seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank